Welcome to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast, where we seek to further equip you for the work of ministry by discussing a variety of biblical, theological, and practical topics. Stick around until the end of the episode to learn how you can submit a question for us to answer on the podcast.
Welcome back to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Toby Baxley, and I used to be the host of this podcast until these guys took over the last couple of weeks, twice in my absence, once because I was sick and then once because I was at a conference last week, but I'm back.
Tell us a little bit about your conference, Toby. We haven't heard anything about that. The ACBC conference?
ACBC, yeah, Biblical Counseling Conference. It was in Fort Worth. It was a good time. We heard a lot of teaching. I was telling somebody that it's 11 plenary sessions. It's 11 sermons in 3 days.
Wow.
And that's a lot. We went to the pre-conference as well, which is for those 11, but that was a really rich time from hearing teaching from 1 Peter about suffering saints and how to encourage and counsel those who are suffering. But then I was telling Chris on the way upstairs here that it was different than what I was expecting, because it was pitched last year as what's called Ancient Paths, and it's how did God equip us to counsel and disciple one another before modern psychology. How did we counsel one another before Freud? And obviously we know from church history that Freud is basically a blip on the radar, and in the stream of time, really very recent blip on the radar. And so how did God equip us to counsel and disciple one another in the church before modern psychology? And so I don't know exactly what I was expecting, but it ended up being kind of a Puritan conference, talking about the counsel of the Puritans. So one of the sessions was on Thomas Brooks's book, Precious Remedies for Satan's Devices. And that was really good. We heard Sinclair Ferguson speak twice, which I think is a kind of a rarity for a plenary speaker you hear from twice, unless it's MacArthur and he opens and closes. But it was two sessions in a row that we heard from Sinclair Ferguson, which was wonderful. He's a great speaker. If you can understand what he's saying, it's very rich content
with his Scottish accent.
Yeah. And Joel Beakey was really good. And then there's a guy that I just heard of recently named Stephen Yuille.
Oh, yeah.
Yuille.
Yes.
And he's a pastor up in Granbury.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's a professor at Southwestern Seminary, but heard him speak on a podcast recently about mysticism, especially as it comes to decision making. And that wasn't what his talk was about. It was another Puritan, kind of a Puritan-esque topic, but really enjoyed hearing him. But it's good. It always kind of whets my appetite, I guess, for helping people to counsel them from God's word, and just increases my passion for that, and really increases my rejection of psychology as it relates to the Christian life. We've been so infiltrated by it, and we don't even realize how many ways we have been. But so that was good, and but glad to be back for sure. It's a lot of information. Of course, Shepherd's Conference is a lot, and you feel like you've been through something when you when you come through a conference. It's just nonstop. But good breakout sessions too. There was one about in-law relationships, and we're new in that world. As we know that Garrett, my oldest son, has recently gotten married, and so we're navigating in-law relationships. It's been pretty easy so far, mostly because we haven't seen them.
2 week honeymoon phase.
2 week honeymoon.
It's the in-law honeymoon phase.
Yeah.
It's the in-law honeymoon phase.
I never thought about it. You could do a podcast on that.
Yeah, you could.
When you get through the in-law honeymoon phase,
Right.
what do you do next?
Right. Yeah. And then some of the other ones, there was one that was really meaningful, and now I can't remember what it was. So I'll have to go back and look at my notes. But anyway, but it's good to be back, and Chris should maybe join us sometime, hopefully soon. He had to step out.
He had a slight emergency.
Yeah. But what I want to talk about today is something that really comes on the heels of the last sermon that Chris preached, and very thankful for that sermon series on biblical manhood and womanhood. I was telling somebody yesterday at lunch that I really feel like it's really changed the culture of our church. I've experienced the change in thinking of what people are thinking about in relation to this, and it was this series that really lit a fire under Garrett and McKenna to go ahead and get married. And we're seeing more young Christian families having children and not waiting to get married, but going ahead and as long as all the flags are green, going ahead with that, and then having children and raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So we're thankful for that. I think we've got 2 or 3 young families in our church that are expecting. So thankful for that. We're outpacing. I think we're outpacing in the church. We're outpacing the world in bringing children into the world. So that can't be a bad thing to have children being brought into Christian homes where they're going to be discipled and trained in loving the Lord, and prayerfully the Lord will call those children at an early age to love Him and follow Him, and then they'll go forward and get married and have babies of their own, and
generational
discipleship
right there,
right,
first order.
Yeah. So, but anyway, going back to the topic of the day, coming off of what Chris preached out of Ephesians 5 about wives submitting to their husbands and husbands loving their wives as Christ loved the church. It's come up recently that there are women in our church, in our spheres of influence and friendship who have really outpaced their husbands spiritually. They're more spiritually mature than their husbands. Sometimes their husband may not even be a believer, and we don't know that from person to person. But when he's not bearing fruit, when he's not leading the family, I put on our pastor chat, what's a girl to do when he's not leading? So, any thoughts in that direction?
Yeah, certainly a challenging situation that I've seen over and over again, and I certainly don't envy those women who are in marriages who have husbands that are either unbelievers or believers but aren't really being obedient to the word. I know Chris's sermon from a couple of weeks ago in 1 Peter 3, I know was hopefully encouraging to women in those situations. Just might be helpful to just reread that passage. 1 Peter 3 says, in the same way, you wives be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry and putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. And Peter goes on. But, I've witnessed situations where this has been effective. This whole challenge, exhortation to women in these kinds of situations has been effective in either leading their husbands back to where they need to be in terms of functioning as believers in the home, or in many cases leading their husbands to Christ through this exact kind of method of the chaste, respectful behavior. It's interesting to me that in this passage, Peter isn't somehow prescribing something different in a marriage that might be unequally yoked, that wives are still called to honor and respect their husbands, even if they're not believers. And I think that's important. A great example of this is my mother. My mom was married for 30 plus years, not to my dad, but to my stepfather, who was a Jewish man. He died a couple years ago at 96 years old, I believe. And he was not a believer, but my mom really had returned to her faith early in their marriage through some very interesting circumstances. And I feel like she really exemplified this passage with him to the point where we're not sure if he became a believer, but he sure was asking lots of questions and even very much supported her in her Christian faith, in terms of her commitment to her church, to her Christian friends, and he would even buy her Bibles, and he would occasionally go to church with her. He would read Christian books, that she recommended to him, and even though it's unclear whether or not he became a believer toward the end of his life, there was definitely a marked change in him from their early part of their marriage. And I believe a lot of that had to do with my mother's very, chaste and respectful behavior, and that gentle and quiet spirit that she exhibited, really caused him to think long and hard about the Christian faith.
Yeah.
So,
when we're thinking about men leading their families, where does that idea come from? Obviously, we've got a call for men to love their families, love their wives as Christ loved the church. Somebody help me with where is that call in the Bible for men to lead their families? And what does that actually look like? How much of what we want to see from men is kind of Western cultural, and how much of it is actually biblical?
Well, I think Chris hit on it a little bit on Sunday, just the creation order, right? That he's the head of the wife.
Yeah.
And it didn't say Christian husbands are the head of the wife, right? It's just the common grace of marriage.
yeah.
And so what does that look like? Now, obviously, what did he say? He said submission ends where sin begins. So it's not that a husband who is a non-believer or a believer leading because he's the head, he's the leader, and leads into some kind of a sinful behavior. So then that's where submission ends. But let's assume that it's not a sinful thing, but where's the leading come from is the creation order, I believe, right? I mean, I think that would be the starting point of it. Besides, you might read passages in Proverbs and just and in the New Testament about a husband being the leader. And I think how does a wife who has outpaced her husband, spiritually speaking, still be submissive?
Mm-hmm.
Because her submission, as the scripture said in Ephesians 5, is ultimately unto the Lord, right? And she's submitting to the Lord despite his immaturity or lack of growth, except where sin begins, right? And so could we argue that sin began when he quit leading? I mean, there's probably some argument there when he was usurping his role as a head of the home. So is that sinful? I think it could be, right? So what does that look like? So ultimately her submission is to the Lord, which is going to reflect on her husband. It's going to reflect on her relationship to him. It's going to reflect on what you're saying, Scott, is her witness to him. And that should, if he's a believer, it's going to hopefully cause him to step up.
Yeah.
And who's speaking into his life? Who, if he's a Christian and he's an obedient Christian in a sense of to some degree of going to church, taking his family to church, which I think would be an argument that there's a lot of husbands who are not, right? It's the wife who is taking the family to church. But if he's just a weak believer, he's not a growing believer, he's more passive, she is kind of taking the reins of leading the family to church, leading the family, those kind of things. Hopefully somebody has identified this person, this man, and can begin discipling him and speaking into his life, challenging him, that the church would come around that woman and do that, But what I don't think it means is she says, okay, I'm going to take the reins. No longer, and I'm going to now I'm going to become the leader per se. I'm going to become the head of this family. And I think we see that a lot. We see that a lot in Christian couples where if you really got down to it, the wife's the leader. Yeah. And maybe it's because he's been passive, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's her own sinful behavior.
Right. Yeah. It's a fine line for a woman who has spiritually outpaced her husband with regard to spiritual maturity and whatnot, as to where does she step back, let her husband lead, and where does she fill in those gaps, particularly spiritually where he's not leading. And I think, if there are situations that are not, like you said, Murray, as Chris said, that submission stops where sin begins. I think that in as far as even an unbelieving husband is leading in such a way that he's not, doing something sinful in that, overtly in terms of maybe forcing his wife or family to deny their conscience and do things that their spiritual conscience would not allow them to do, that becomes a very difficult situation, because then you do have to resist that. But in as much as they are exhibiting some kind of leadership, it may not be a spiritual kind of leadership. They may not be leading their family in devotions and things like that. But I think even a Christian wife has to allow that unbelieving husband to exert, what God has wired us all for. And namely that men are the heads of their homes. Men are going to be gravitating toward leadership roles more so than women are. And particularly that's the case in the family. So I think a Christian woman has to be very, very wise and discerning in how she allows that to happen, and not just jump the gun and start taking over, because then that pushes the husband to more passivity. Especially if you have a husband who's not really stepping up to the plate in the first place. Yeah,
and I think in a practical way, if it just comes down to something as simple as taking him to church, well, he is not leading out in that. Should she, because he's not leading out, well, then we just won't go to church? Of course not, right? She's going to still raise her children in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. She's not going to neglect assembling together. So yeah, she would continue doing it. But I think how she does it is going to be a witness to her own children on how she so to kind of takes the reins where needed, but still respects her husband. Mm-hmm. And the children see that, right? They see that, they recognize, they come to an age where they recognize dad has not stepped up to the plate.
Right.
Mom is the one who's leading us spiritually. However, we see that mom still respects dad.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that.
Absolutely.
That's a good testimony, because there is going to come a point where those children are going to have to make the decision to go or to not go, to get married, and to who they're going to get married, and to see this model of their mother still respecting and submitting to their husband, yet leading where necessary, maybe.
Yeah, a Christian mother never wants to, badmouth and beat down her husband, the father of her children, in a way that then the children, build a deep level of disrespect for the husband. Now, obviously in some cases you have husbands who may be engaged in an egregious sin. And again, this is where discernment and wisdom comes into place, where a man may have behaved in such a way that he garners zero respect, zero honor because of his own behavior. So we have to discern the situation. Each situation is going to be slightly different. And, but I mean, by and large, a mother who wants to have a spiritual influence in her children's lives needs to teach those children to still respect their father, and yet at the same time, quietly share with them, sometimes your dad may not be doing what he's supposed to, but we still need to show him honor and respect. Yeah. And it can be difficult. It's, again, it's not a situation that I wish for any woman to be in.
Yeah. And that even is only up to a point. If he's doing serious damage to the family, I mean, her responsibility is actually to call him out on it, or to get away from it.
Yeah, remove the family. Yeah.
Remove the family
abuse from them. And
right. If it's certainly when it starts moving into that.
But if we're talking, just a run of the mill family, he's not growing. He's maybe a baby believer, or he's just a believer who isn't really
largely passive.
Yeah, passive, not growing in his faith, not leading the family, and he's not too concerned about going to church or not on Sundays, sometimes, but she really is like, hey, we have to do it. Then she should do it. Yeah. Right? Yeah. She absolutely should do it. She shouldn't. If she's outpacing him in her spiritual growth, because that was one of the things you said, Toby, I think, was they're not on the same page spiritually, right? And so does she stop her own spiritual growth for the sake of following his leadership and letting him? No. She continues growing. She continues growing, pointing the kids, but not in a run-of-the-mill situation, not in a disrespectful way of her husband.
Because he's probably not likely, if she were to stall her spiritual growth in order for him to catch up, he's probably not going to catch up.
So she should continue doing it, and I think maybe which you said, Scott, in the example of your mom and stepdad, is her doing that has a very good chance, especially if he's a believer, a very good chance of causing him to scratch his head and go, "What's up?" Yeah, like it's the Lee Strobel story of his salvation, right? Mm-hmm. Lee Strobel's wife got saved, and I don't know the intricacies of it. I didn't see the movie. I've read the book, but she became a Christian, and he's just like, what the heck is this? I'm not going to stop doing what I do and all that. But it just was like coals on his head, heaping coals on his head, because she just was so faithful and loved him so well and respected him in the midst of him being antagonistic to her Christian faith, that it just probably caused him to gnash his teeth. And he said, well, I'm gonna go disprove this thing.
He set out to prove her wrong.
Yeah, to prove her wrong. And then, the hinge pin of the resurrection made him go, oh my gosh, this is real. This is true, right? I mean, I think there's a witness in there.
I think for a Christian woman who's married to perhaps an unbeliever, and she shows him disrespect, she's breaking the biblical pattern, and therefore has lost her witness to her husband in that regard. Whereas if she maintains her convictions, and treats her husband respectfully, I've seen more times than not that the husbands then, are very, non-antagonistic toward her Christian faith and allows her, go to church, take the kids to church, things like that. And whereas if she is disrespectful and antagonistic or somehow prideful or arrogant, well, look at me, I'm a Christian, you're not, and I'm better than you are, kind of thing. You're going to create a kind of tension in that marriage, and I don't think that's going to be conducive to leading that husband to where he needs to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be honey, not vinegar, right? That's going to attract him for sure. And that's just our Christian witness in general.
Yeah, exactly.
That plays itself out in marriage.
It just plays itself out in those unique situations, and
because he would even just an average man is going to when he deserved disrespect because of his own behavior, and she gave him respect and value and honor, he's in his quiet moments scratching his head going, what is this? And he sees that it's Christ, and he's like, let's say he's a believer. He's like, there could be a conviction to step up. Like, man, I need to step up. And maybe he needs some help. And that's where the church comes in. That's where men who all three of us, including Chris, have run across a lot of men who have been very passive leaders in their family and needed another man to speak into their life in a good way, in a rebuking, convicting way, but also an encouraging way. And they begin to step up. We've seen it happen. Yeah. And that's the value of the church.
Passivity feels really good in the moment.
Yeah.
And it's easy for a moment to become a lifetime. But I think over the course of time, that passivity, that if he's not called out of it, it will result in resentment. There's just kind of that quiet resignation. His wife essentially has become the de facto leader of the house, and he's part of the furniture, but he resents her for it. It's because he's abdicated his role as the head of the house. He's abdicated that to her, but he also resents her for picking up the slack for him. And, from the witness of Scripture, we see that that's not the way it's supposed to be. And Paul and Peter both call men to love their wives, and in this sense, loving your wife, men, is not. It's more than affection. It's more than a feeling. It's actually a servant leadership. It's self-sacrificial service, and so that means that you take the lead on, like Chris, but you take the lead on the finances. You take the lead in discipling your kids, even if she's homeschooling. Men should still oversee that, not in a domineering way, but in a partnering way, to make sure that the children are being educated, and they need to be interested in that. We homeschool our kids, as many know, but we've heard so many stories from other homeschool families where the wife or the mom is the homeschool teacher, and the man just kind of doesn't care. He's like, you're in charge, you're in charge of that, and he's very disengaged from that, and that's not what we want. So, I think what are some. I've got a couple of things in mind, but I want to get you guys to chime in on this. What are some practical ways? What are some practical ways that a woman can encourage her lagging husband? How can she encourage her lagging husband without disrespecting? And My first thing is do not nag.
Yeah, I was just going to say
do not nag him.
Don't nag him.
Nagging because nagging is disrespecting.
That's right. 100%. So you take two couples with the same exact scenario, and you have one wife who is leading where leading needs to happen because she's not going to let the kids be spiritually malnourished because the husband won't step up, the dad won't step up. She's going to do it, but how she does it is going to dictate her respect or lack of respect for her husband. Period. Right? It's how she would go about doing it.
Yeah.
And can she still? She's outpacing her husband. Can she still take up the role where it's being lacked in a respectful way? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like you say, it's not nagging. It's like, well, if you're not going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And you're versus the tone, just the conversation. And that's difficult. She probably needs some coaching in that. She probably needs some help from some other women in her church, the Titus 2 that can speak into her life on how do you navigate not letting your children suffer spiritually, but also not disrespect your husband.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another related issue with nagging can just be speaking to your husband in a belittling kind of way. Mm-hmm. It can be very disrespectful and crush his spirit and make him resentful and turn him away. And I think that's even a product of our larger culture where men are basically regarded as, Neanderthals. We're just
animals.
Backward, stupid creatures, and you see that all over in our culture. I think some of that is being challenged now. It's why I think young men who've grown up in that environment are finally starting to realize, hey, we're people too, and I'm a man, and so some of that has been expressed in sort of extreme kind of ways, that aren't generally always helpful, but yeah, it's you watch commercials, you watch TV shows where men are the idiots, and now it used to be that old movies and shows
50s,
the women were the idiots, and so but now the tables have kind of flipped a little bit in that regard, and a lot of that I believe is a result of just feminism and whatnot, but anyway, and Murray, what you said, the whole Titus 2 thing, young women, particularly that are in these difficult situations, they need to actively be seeking out those women in the church that they have respect for, who have, gone through these things, who have, had, godly marriages and have been able to raise children, and whatnot, to seek out those women and say, hey, could we go to lunch together and build a relationship, and just say, hey, I'm struggling with how to handle my husband, or, how do I handle the kids, and how do I'm swimming here by myself, and, take advantage of godly women in the church. And godly women in the church likewise need to be seeking out those young women in the church, that are in that boat, and start building relationships with them, and come alongside them and help them.
Yeah, I think in the same vein as the do not nag, I would say replace some language, kind of basic communication between couples, right? You don't use nevers and always. Don't use superlatives. You never do this. You always do this. So fight fair. Make your argument in instead of using you need to do this or you ought to do this. I would say, hey, it would really mean a lot to me if you would. It would mean a lot to me if you would spend some time with the kids. If you would take the kids out for ice cream, or spend some time with them. It would mean a lot to me if you would go to church with me. And you don't have to you need to go to church with me. You said you'd go to church
Right.
with me. Why don't you do this? What's the matter with you? But it would mean a lot to me if you'd go to church with me.
Yeah, it might even be like something to say, hey, I know you don't want to, you're kind of da-da-da-da, but hey, would you just like, could we do like once a month? Would you be willing to come once a month? You know what I mean? And it's in the tone and it's in the, and it's like, yeah, and you never know how the Lord might use that and work that out, and it might be you wake up one Sunday morning and your husband's getting dressed and says, and she goes, what are you doing? And he goes, I want to go to church with you guys.
Yeah.
That might happen. And
Right.
so it's truly this whole idea, not unfortunately, but I think what we've shifted to almost like we're talking about how the wife needs to do a good job of respecting her husband when he's not stepping up to the plate, and I think that we need to also address the men, like the men that aren't stepping up to, right?
Sure.
They need to be addressed, why aren't you? What are you doing? What is going on in your life? If you're a believer, what is going on? We're not talking about non-believers. We're talking about believers who are not stepping up to the plate, who are letting their wives lead or expecting their wives to lead. Whatever it is, what are you doing and what are you not doing and why is this happening?
Yeah. And the long-term consequences of that are not good.
Yeah.
Generationally.
All
not
across
good.
the board.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so as far as it concerns like family devotions and things like that, I think that same thing still applies. Hey, it would really mean a lot to me if you would, hey, maybe read a chapter of the Bible to us at breakfast. And then to go along with that is to encourage and praise every little thing that you see in that direction.
Yeah.
Encourage what you want repeated. Encourage what you want that growth in. So call out those things instead of just calling out all the things the ways that he's failing.
Yeah.
Call out the ways that you see growth and encourage those things. Be specific. Hey, I saw that you did this, and that's really great, and I really appreciate that.
And that's just great advice, wisdom, counsel in general, that when you have a situation of conflict or, you're wanting to call out something that your spouse is doing, it's wrong or sinful or something, that, you tend to diffuse the situation when you begin with, hey, look, I really appreciate, this and praise them for things that they've done right, so that you're not just coming in attack mode.
Right.
And that way, when you do bring that confrontation, it's in the context of, hey, you've done well in these areas, and I want to thank you and praise you for that, but here's a concern I have, or whatever.
It's like the praise
and that would be a
sandwich.
it's exactly the praise sandwich. But that would be an example of respecting your husband, right?
Yeah.
In the midst of, even though you could argue, are we to love our wives as Christ loved the church only when they respect us?
Yeah.
No,
Right.
it's a relatively unconditional love, right? Which the world has no problem with.
Right.
Everybody goes, yeah. Well, respect flips the same way, right? And so submission stops when sin begins. We know that, but apart from that, that shows respect to your husband, and that very well could be used by the Lord to bring him closer to stepping up as a leader, closer to Christ, all those good things, that we want. And that's marriage, right? That's the hardest thing. The hardest thing for a husband to do is to love his wife when she's being disrespectful. That's the hardest thing. The hardest thing for a wife to do to respect her husband is when he's being unloving or not stepping up or all those things that we're talking about, right? So you begin to do those things, and we know just in counseling, there's only one person that you can change, and that's yourself. There's only one person, and that's yourself. You can't wait to be respectful when he starts loving you, or you can't wait to be more loving when she's more respectful. No, you can only work on yourself, and we all have work, right? Even if we're 99% in a court of law, right? There's that 1% that we could work on in the situation,
I'm always reminded of, the Proverbs have all kinds of great verses on communication, but the one that has always struck me as very powerful and applicable in all kinds of situations is Proverbs 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is just so true.
Profound.
When we speak disrespectfully, we speak harshly, you're just going to stir up anger. But if you speak gently, respectfully, you'll diffuse an angry situation. But if you just start fighting fire with fire, the fire is just going to get larger.
That's right. Always, it's almost a guarantee.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean, and that's one of the elder qualifications as well for us as men is gentleness. We're not pugnacious. We're not looking for a fight.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to come in and try to lead and shepherd gently. And that book that we read a while back, that David Mathis book, Workers for Your Joy,
mm-hmm.
and just the title of it, that one chapter, says the strongest men are gentle. It's like, I was really broken by that.
Yeah.
But it goes for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It really shows a lot of strength to be gentle, and it takes a lot of strength to be gentle. But we tend to kind of get out of our lane when we're using harshness and belittling to try to make a point.
And it takes discipline. I mean, it's a discipline to learn to be gentle, because our first reaction, to a contrary situation, a conflict, is to immediately, get in a dogfight.
Yeah.
And so it requires a lot of discipline to say, okay, I can't respond this way. I've got to respond in a gentle and kind way.
Yeah.
And we're accountable to God, right? It's Michael Dennis's sermon on victim, right? So he has usurped his role as leader, and so how is she going to respond? Let's just say sinful in a general sense, but not like he's trying to lead the family to sin, but just that was it's sinful for him to not lead, right? In a general sense. So how she responds. Well, she's accountable to God for how she responds. And the accountability is I'm still going to respect my husband in that situation, right? And vice versa for him as well in a loving situation. So,
yeah. And the fruit of walking in the Spirit is applicable to all of us. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. There's no law against those things, and there's great benefit to walking in the fruit of the Spirit in our relationship with the Lord and in our relationships with one another. So, all right. Anything else to add?
I was just going to say another thing for women, how can they engage their husbands, and that sort of thing. Ask them, how can I pray for you?
Yeah.
How can I pray for you today?
That's not antagonistic, right?
Is there a work situation? Your husband's.
Yeah, I know you're stressed. I know that you got a lot going on
for this
really
or that. Say, how can I pray for you today? Is what's going to happen today? And say, okay, I'm going to pray for you. And if he doesn't, and there's nothing wrong that with saying, hey, can I just pray for you right now before you leave this morning to go to work? I know you're going to have a difficult meeting today. Can I just pray for you? That'd be a wonderful thing for a wife to do.
That's like melting the chains.
Yeah. Whether he's a believer or not.
Yeah, for sure. So you had mentioned something, Scott, that's a little teaser for next week. So as I was driving from a meeting this morning here and listening to the briefing, and I was thinking about podcast topic for next week, which I'm going to lead. So the little teaser is, because you mentioned it, that there's this shift away from this emasculation of men in our culture, right? And it's on the heels of everything that's going on, without getting political in it, but just with Charlie Kirk and some type of resurgence. Well, Al Mohler there was an article, must have been either yesterday or this morning in the, I think it was the New York Times. He quotes a lot from the Washington Post and New York Times, but it talked about how the Gen Zers are making a shift towards Christianity, right? Evangelical Christianity. Yeah. So
particularly young men.
Yeah, that's what Gen Z are young men. That's what I meant. Yeah, as young men are, that they are seeing an influx of young men into the church, which is a very interesting thing. So I'm going to do a little research on.
And we've seen that at KBC.
Yeah, into some of those statistics.
Yeah,
and it might be a good topic on what that means for the church. What are the dangers of that? Right? How do we get not it swing to misogyny and male chauvinism right? So how do we navigate this? Are we in this little window, a period of time in our world, which is very interesting because we all have Gen Z boys, right? And we see it in them, which is kind of cool. It's kind of fun to see it in them. Yeah. But like on a larger scale, we're seeing it in the United States. It's kind of interesting. So anyway,
good.
Hopefully that's a teaser, and if I disappoint, then...
Or if you change your mind.
If I change my mind,
that'll be all right, too.
That's what I mean. I'll probably disappoint, but I don't think I'll change my mind.
Okay. All right. Well, Chris, we missed you wherever you are. So I hope this was helpful to you, and Lord willing, we'll be back with this topic that Murray has already teased out. So we'll pray and we'll be on our way. Our Father in heaven, thank you for this discussion today. Thank you for godly women who are in our church and maybe in our listenership who may have outpaced their husbands. Their husbands may not even be believers, but I pray that they would continue to keep the faith and keep their godly witness by their quiet and chaste life and a respect for him, that they would take something away from this podcast that they can use to encourage him toward leading, that they can defer to him on decisions and then encourage the good things that they do see as an encouragement for him to excel still more. So just pray for your grace. It's all by your grace that we're able to do any of these things. And pray that this discussion was helpful to our listeners, both men and women. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thanks for listening to the Kerrville Bible Church Pastors Podcast. We want to be a resource for you and answer the questions that are on your mind. Please send them to us via email at questions@kerrvillebiblechurch.org or call or text us at 830-321-0349.